Welcome to the Rimworld mod rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from Ra's, Bionics and Surgery expansion. For starters, you won't need any additional workshop content, not even Harmony. Crazy, right? I'm on a bit of an implant and stat boost kick at the moment in terms of coverage, which means I can't ignore RBSE and its great integrations into limb replacement and medical treatment options. With this mod, you'll be getting 8 quote-unquote new research options, with updated vanilla prosthetic and bionic projects. You also get some new advanced bionics, synthetic organs, and 3 extremely potent brain implants, as well as a handful of tweaks to base game mechanics and stats. First up, let's cover the biggest mechanical change. It's the only thing this mod has an option to enable or disable: organ rejection. Installing a stranger's organ into your colonist no longer goes without issues with this setting enabled. Transplanted hearts, lungs, kidneys, livers and stomachs will now all come with a rejection offset once installed. This condition works similarly to something like asthma. A good tend will push it towards 0% but never fully cure it, whilst a bad tend will allow it to slowly rise in severity. The higher this rejection severity becomes, the lower the part efficiency will drop, as well as applying a consciousness debuff and increasing the amount of pain the pawn feels. Between 0 and 30% rejection, it'll be mild, with just -5% part efficiency. 30 to 60 is moderate rejection, -30% efficiency, -20% consciousness, and 15% constant pain. Serious rejection kicks in between 60 to 80 severity. Part efficiency is now down to 50%, consciousness is also down to 30%, and pain is at 25%. Above 80%, the rejection becomes deadly. 40% pain, -70% part efficiency, and -60% consciousness. Remember that some parts will also have a further effect on consciousness because of this efficiency debuff too, like the laboured breathing or an overworked heart doing double duty to keep the poor soul alive. As you would expect, if severity ever hits 100%, that's death. So if the colonist can live without that body part and hits the deadly stage of rejection, you would do better taking it out and suffering a total loss of part efficiency instead. I'd rather only have 1 kidney than 2 if one of those 2 was actively trying to murder me.
Peter, you don't look so good.
What are you talking about? I feel great. Like I could go another 20 years or more.
Now, rejection isn't the only change with organs in Ra's either. Certain organs will now decay when stored outside of a freezer, which does make total sense, but I'm well aware that some players might find this change annoying, as you now either need to keep cold storage close to your hospital or make additional space in your freezer to store these body parts. After all, who doesn't want to see a pile of hearts, lungs and kidneys when grabbing their evening meal? You can of course get around this with the old faithful rim fridge, so you don't need to build an entire room, but can still keep them within arm's reach for surgeries. That isn't all of the changes to organs either, but we're going to cover the other ones with the associated research, so let's go through the tech tree. Anatomy and physiology is taking over from your vanilla prosthetics research, but it does come with some changes. Normally, prosthetics would have unlocked the cochlear implant, arm, heart, and leg, all created at the machining table. Anatomy and physiology still gets you the cochlear implant, arm, and leg, but no heart. Simple prosthetics cannot adequately replicate the complex nature and function of a human heart. With this research, you do also get the artificial bone, artificial nose, and simple prosthetic feet and hands. So whilst you can't fix a heart problem with prosthetics anymore, you have much easier access to correct shattered noses, broken bones, and missing fingers and toes. The legs, arms, hands, and feet all work as you would expect, replacing what is left, if anything, of the organic part at the install site with something that operates at 80% efficiency, with whole arms and legs costing 120 steel and 4 components, whilst hands and feet only cost 60 steel and 3 components. A replacement hand or foot becomes more beneficial than a normal one when it's lost 2 or more digits. A single missing finger or toe isn't cause to replace a whole hand, as trigger happy as some of you out there might be. The artificial nose only costs 10 plasteel and will remove the beauty debuff applied to a colonist with a busted face. These replacement noses are just as fragile as a normal one, and can easily be broken again if the pawn is determined to keep getting into social fights or not wear their helmet. The cochlear implant has a different cost profile but the same part efficiency as a vanilla one. It now requires 40 steel but only a single component, compared to the vanilla 20 steel and 4 components. The artificial bone is surprisingly multi-purpose, and not in that way. It works as a femur, humerus, radius, tibia, or even a spine. On the very rare occasion that you have a colonist take a bone-shattering strike without also losing the associated limb, or for the more common occurrence of having someone take a bullet in the spine and be completely crippled, these simple replacements have you covered. Costing just 10 plasteel and 20 steel to make, they operate at 80% efficiency for the arms and legs, with a small reduction to 70% if implanted in the spine. However, I would happily take a colonist that can walk, work, and take care of themselves again over someone that's permanently bedridden. Next is the research for organ transplantation, requiring microelectronics on top of anatomy and physiology research. And this is where most people just went nope and stopped the video.
Nope.
With RAS, organ transplantation is treated with the difficulty that it actually involves in reality. Whilst you might be able to carve a wooden leg or a hand and crudely attach it to someone's stump, or hack apart and pull out some of their squishy bits, reattaching those parts is actually a pretty damn involved procedure. So with RBSE enabled, you won't be able to install any organs on a colonist until you've unlocked this tech. You're still free to use raiders as a visceral silver pinata that you hit with a sharp stick and then sell any goodies that drop out of it, but you will need to be quite deep in the research tree before you can use them for anything besides trade. Then you've got Bionics research, with some tweaked costs and a couple of new additions to boot. Whereas vanilla Bionics needed fabrication and prosthetics, RAS will require anatomy and microelectronics. The Bionic workbench helps to trim down the excessive amount of bills that can sometimes end up occurring at your fabrication station, costing 200 steel, 50 plasteel and 5 components. It isn't exactly cheap, and it also requires a good chunk of power too. Not only that, you also don't want this workstation in your hospital, as it has a negative impact on cleanliness, so it's probably best to keep it in your normal workshop setup. Let's quickly do a side-by-side of vanilla parts and RAS remix, as it were. I'll mainly be covering the stat changes and the big adjustments, but a lot of the Bionics in RAS also shift the cost more heavily towards flat plasteel and standard components, compared to Vanilla's light plasteel cost but expensive use of advanced components. You can pause to see the costs side by side if needed, and I'll explain why I'm not digging too deeply into this towards the end of the video. Bionic arms are 5% more efficient as standard. Bionic eyes are 5% more efficient, with an important additional cost that now requires Devil Strand. Bionic legs are 5% more efficient, just like the arms and eyes. The Bionic spine now provides 10% additional manipulation and 10% additional movement. Bionic jaws have a 10% lower part efficiency than their vanilla counterpart. The Bionic tongue works exactly the same. Bionic ears have 100% part efficiency rather than 125%, but offer a flat 5% bonus to negotiation, social impact, tame and train animal chances. There is no Bionic heart option in RAS. There is no Bionic stomach option in RAS either. This still leaves you with the Bionic hand and foot from RAS, giving you a cheaper option to replacing body parts if you're struggling for materials to build up entire arms or legs. The downside to this is that because they have 115% efficiency and replace a smaller amount of parts compared to the 130% of a total swap, you will see less of a positive impact to manipulation or movement. So where possible, it's best to replace the entire limb, but maybe the trader only turned up with hands or feet, or you don't feel quite comfortable liberating a guest of their installed Bionics to install on your own colonists.
Okay, how much for the arm? Oh, I'll get that arm.
Finally, from this research you have the power arm. This takes the Bionic arm and changes its manipulation bonus into a very specific melee weapon, capable of dealing only one strike, a cut from the fist, for 22 damage on a 1.6 second swing. In pretty much all cases, this will be a strict downgrade to most melee colonists, as the manipulation bonus from a standard Bionic arm would have offered them better combat prowess across any weapon that they could wield, whereas this power arm typically results in social fights that absolutely maim the ever-loving crap out of someone, without giving much of an upside in an actual fight. Then we've got regenerative medicine. This research will unlock the medical procedures to remove scarring and permanent injuries, costing 3 glitter world medicine and requiring a doctor with at least 10 medical skill. Extremely handy for things like torso or head injuries that are constantly lowering the max health of the part, which allows more weapons to potentially one-shot an unfortunate colonist. It also saves you from wasting healer mech serums on scars when you wanted to fix another problem on the colonist, although you can always get around this issue by just using healer mech serum choice if you'd prefer. Then in this tree we have advanced bionics. This allows you to further improve your standard bionic parts at the new, and again, costly advanced medical station. This is where you'll be creating all of the most advanced parts from RARs. It costs 200 steel, 100 plasteel and 4 components to build, requiring 450 watts of power. And again, it has a cleanliness debuff as standard. You probably want this set up right near your bionic workbench to save a bit of legwork. Here you'll be able to upgrade arms, ears, eyes, feet, hands, legs, spines and power arms, with the important word being upgrade. You're going to need the basic bionic part to begin work on these builds. This stage of upgrade is also where the advanced component cost starts to creep in, and things get pretty expensive, which is understandable given the efficiency of these body parts. Arms and legs are upping that part efficiency to 150%, requiring an extra 20 plasteel and 4 advanced components to ascend them in quality. Hands and feet go up to 130%, costing an additional 20 plasteel and 2 advanced components. The eyes go up to 150% efficiency, requiring 8 hyperweave and 4 advanced components. The spine doubles its bonus to manipulation and movement, now at 20%, requiring 20 more plasteel and 4 advanced components. The ear only needs 10 plasteel and 1 advanced component, pushing the negotiation, social impact, tame and train bonuses up to 10%, making for a very cost efficient and accessible buff for your best socialites or animal handlers. The advanced power arm now makes more sense, with its upgrade costing 30 plasteel, 3 advanced components and 5 uranium, dealing 30 damage on a 1.6 second swing with 45% armor penetration. Again, be a little careful as this has the potential to decapitate people in a social fight, and you're still not getting any manipulation bonus from this arm. You would honestly get more out of using a normal quality mono sword and an advanced bionic arm, but the advanced power arm will let you specifically cultivate what melee attacks you want that pawn to use. Finally, at this level there is the exoskeleton suit, costing 30 plasteel, 150 steel and 7 advanced components, providing a bonus of 15% to manipulation and moving. These things are understandably expensive to produce and provide a versatile and reliable buff to basically every colonist that they're installed on. Now some of you out there are sitting with your head tilted asking, so these things are as strong as Architect limbs? In vanilla, yeah they would be, but with RARs, Architect arms, legs and eyes are now 160% efficient, so they're still the tippy top of the parts pile. This upgrading mechanic also results in a few interesting days around the colony too, as the limbs are generally expensive enough that you're unlikely to be sitting on a huge stockpile of them for upgrading purposes, meaning Bobby is going to be walking around the base missing an arm for a couple of days whilst you put some new bits into it. Just pray that you don't botch the procedure when you're reinstalling it and lose the entire limb.
And it's gone.
What?
It's gone. It's all gone.
Onto the final tiers of tech, starting at synthetic organs. This gets you organ replacements that will not experience transplant rejection and operate with increased potency. Extremely expensive to make manually. These are typically things you want to keep an eye out for with exotic traders or passing orbitals. Synthetic organs also require freezing to stay fresh and viable for a transplant, so to avoid disaster, make sure they're set to stockpiles that are kept nice and cold. For these highly advanced parts, you are going to need the research unlocked to be able to install them. So whilst you can buy the parts before you have the tech, so you've got them ready to go, you won't be able to implant them until you've completed these studies. The synthetic heart is the first real option you've been given for a heart transplant outside of borrowing a raider's and dealing with the rejection mechanic, if you've got it enabled anyway. All of these body parts will cost 15 hyperweave, 30 plasteel and 3 advanced components to make. The heart boosts blood pumping by 20% and moving and manipulation stats by 10%. The blood pumping also provides a minor overflow effect on moving too. All of these synthetic parts come with a 90% surgery success rate and a 10% death on failure, needing a medical skill of 12 to install and at least 3 medicine. To offset this as best as possible, make sure the combined surgical skill of your doctor and the offset applied by the room pushes their surgical success chance above 110%. That needs a medical skill of at least 15 to hit, a normal quality hospital bed at minimum, and ideally a sterile room. Then the only way to screw this up is that constant niggling 2% chance of failure floating in the background. The synthetic kidney can make even immunocompromised xenotypes live an easier life, adding an additional 20% to blood filtration. Of course, if you're using xenotypes like modded genies, they're still going to be all kinds of scuffed with any illnesses, so it isn't quite as simple as providing a flat bonus to immunity from illnesses. The synthetic liver doesn't operate with offsets like previous parts, instead it simply increases part efficiency to 125%. This adds 25% to blood filtration and 12% to digestion once calculated. So if you're looking to up immunity gain speed and not simply replace a missing part with these organs, the liver actually has a greater impact than installing a single kidney. The synthetic lung goes back to the formula of fixed stat offsets, adding 20% to breathing and 5% to moving, which actually works out to be 9% with the overflow from breathing, providing its bonus too. If you want someone to go really fast, you've also got to make sure they have the lung capacity to handle the exhaustion that running at those speeds is causing. The synthetic stomach swaps it out again for flat part efficiency, probably the weakest of the organs, especially given that a colonist can survive without a stomach. It'll up the digestion stat to 112%, but this only impacts rest rate by a super trivial amount. This has nothing to do with xenotypes that have awful metabolic efficiency. For that, you need something like a nuclear stomach that drops the hunger rate stat. Now we've got 3 intentionally very powerful parts from neuroscience. All of these parts cost 40 plasteel, 100 gold, and a persona core to build. Yeah, the core that you would usually use to end the game with the rocket. Now you can jam it directly inside the grey matter of one of your colonists and turn them into a living nightmare of human consciousness and ethics with hyper-advanced processing. I give them 2 hours before they decide humanity was a mistake and detonate your stockpile of antimatter shells.
Yep, here's your problem. Someone set this thing to evil.
First is the Cortex Augmenter, increasing global learning factor by 50%, global work speed by 30%, surgery success chance, negotiation impact, and social impact by 15%, as well as providing the elusive buff to consciousness of 5%. These implants are as difficult to install as the synthetic organs, so make sure you've got a very skilled doctor on standby to perform the procedure. Just like the synthetic organs, you're also going to need the tech unlocked to install these parts as well, so don't go buying these from a trader whilst you're still at the tribal stage and get angry that you can't throw them in your colonist brain. Secondly, you've got the Hyporegulator. This improves immunity gain speed by 10%, provides 10 degrees of max and 15 degrees of minimum comfortable temperature, reduces mental break threshold by 15%, lowers pain to just 40% experienced, and drops tiredness rate to 75%. Now, not all of these stats are exactly exciting, but the combination of break threshold and tiredness rate will allow the colonist with this installed to work practically an entire day without risk of snapping on only 4 hours sleep in a decent bed. As always with parts that lower pain experienced, make sure the colonist with this installed isn't letting enemies beat the living piss out of them and just refusing to fall down. The last thing you want is the person with an expensive implant like this to die because they're stubborn. Thirdly, there's the Neurostimulator, the most straightforward of them. This adds an additional 10% consciousness and 15% sight. There's a reason that the consciousness stat is so rarely buffed outside of temporary measures like Go Juice or Wake Up, with it further buffing eating, manipulation, movement, and talking, which in turn goes on to further buff additional stats in the information panel. The trickle-down effect from this implant is massive. The final project is Nanomedicine, which will unlock medical procedures that use Glitter World medicine to remove diseases and health conditions like sleeping sickness, muscle parasites, frailty, with many others also covered. The procedure itself will need 5 Glitter World meds to perform, and it needs a colonist with 14 medical skill. Whilst these procedures are extremely expensive and require a very skilled doctor, they can turn an extremely long and debilitating issue into a minor inconvenience, taking as long to fix as it does to grab the meds off the shelf and vaguely wave them over the affected colonist. Whilst you can use this technology to cure a visitor that you receive for a hospitality quest, it actually won't make much of a difference to the rewards you receive, with it likely being easier to keep them fed and happy by leaving them bedbound, as they'll only find a way to get themselves killed if you let them wander your base. And that is all of your tech and parts, but not all that the mod has to offer. You'll find that you can now finally uninstall death acidifiers upon reaching advanced bionics research. There are new chronic diseases that may appear on the heart, kidneys or stomach, requiring a transplant before the severity reaches its maximum. You'll notice that medicine and Glitterworld meds have had their textures replaced. Please don't sue me, Red Cross. And there's also a few texture tweaks to the prosthetic, bionic and architect parts too, making it easier to differentiate them when they're stored on a shelf. Not only that, if you think the costs for this mod are a little bit too generous, with bionics being easier to obtain, you can use the RBSE Hardcore Edition instead, which ups the crafting cost for all of these parts to provide more of a challenge. One final note to make is that this is one of the few mods I've covered so far that has a hard line of incompatibility. If you're using EPOE, Expanded Prosthetics and Organ Engineering, you're going to have a really bad time trying to get these to play nicely together. It's one or the other. A nice overhaul to the game that does come in with a chunk of additional power, whilst also stripping away some of your early game options as a player, balancing itself back out to work really well when you get into the mid game and hit that stage of gearing up your colony into war machines. Definitely not something to use if you're trying to stick to a low tech run though, as this will probably cripple your options for fixing colonists in those early eras, unless you're happy to roll with the punishment and have a colony full of people that frequently drop dead from organ failure. Thanks for watching folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon or evening. Take care.